My name is Josephine Marsh. I'm 29 years old. 14 months ago, I stood in the banquet hall of the Riverside Grill in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, holding a glass of sparkling water, wearing the blue dress my mother had asked me to wear because it would look nice in photos, and listened to my father call me a waste of a daughter in front of 50 people. He didn't lower his voice. He didn't pull me aside. He turned from the conversation he was having with two of his colleagues, looked at me directly, and said, "You know what your problem is, Joe? You're smart enough to know better and too proud to do better. You're a waste of a daughter, and I've thought so for years." The room didn't stop. Conversations kept going, silverware kept clinking. But the people close enough to hear, and several were, went very quiet. I did not cry. I don't know how I managed that, but I didn't. What I did do was look past my father's left shoulder to table 7, where a man named Gerald Pruitt had been watching the exchange with an expression I couldn't quite read. Gerald Pruitt was my father's division director at Hensley Manufacturing. He'd been my father's boss for 6 years. He had flown in from Chicago specifically for this event, and he had heard every word. Before I tell you what happened between Gerald Pruitt and my father in the weeks that followed, and what I was building quietly that made all of it matter even more, please like and subscribe, but only if this story is resonating with you. Drop a comment below. Where are you watching from right now, and what time is it there? I genuinely love hearing from you all. Now let me take you back to where this actually started, because that night in the banquet hall was years in the making. Growing up in a small suburb outside of Harrisburg, I understood very young that my father had a specific idea of what a successful child looked like, and I kept failing to match it. Not for lack of effort, for lack of being the right shape. Quick picture of my family. Dad was in manufacturing management his entire career, a man who measured everything: people, decisions, outcomes, in terms of efficiency and return. Mom was softer, more conflict-averse, the kind of woman who smoothed things over and called it keeping the peace. My older brother Caleb was everything my father wanted in a son: engineering degree, steady salary, a handshake that closed rooms. And I was the one who wanted to write, who studied English literature, who cared about things my father found decorative at best and useless at worst. The gap between us was not subtle, and it was not new. When I was 13, I won a district-wide writing competition. A short story I'd worked on for 3 months, read and revised and read again, handed in with the particular terror of giving someone a piece of yourself and waiting to see how they hold it. First place, out of 240 entries. My English teacher called my parents personally to tell them. My father's response at dinner that night was, "Writing isn't an industry, Josephine. It's a hobby some people mistake for a calling." I told myself he just didn't understand yet. That understanding would come. When I was 19, I was accepted into the journalism program at Penn State. Competitive program, strong reputation, something I had worked toward deliberately for 2 years. I told my parents over a Sunday dinner, "The way you present things you've earned." My father put down his fork. "Journalism," he said, "the way someone says a word they've decided is beneath them. You're going to spend 4 years learning to write articles nobody will read about things that won't matter in 5 years." My mother said, "Richard, she's excited." He picked his fork back up. "I know she's excited. She was excited about the writing competition, too. Being excited doesn't pay a mortgage." He did not come to my graduation. He said it was a work conflict. My mother came. She sat in the bleachers and cried happy tears, and took 40 photographs and hugged me for a long time afterward. It was a good day. I have tried not to let his absence define my memory of it, but it was also the day I understood, fully and without illusion, that my father was not going to change his assessment of me because I achieved something. He was going to maintain it regardless. The achievement would just be reframed. Too small, wrong field, the wrong kind of success. The verdict had been rendered somewhere much earlier than any of these events, and evidence was not going to reverse it. I graduated, got a job at a small regional magazine, wrote, worked, Climbed the kind of slow and non-linear ladder that creative fields offer. I was good at the work, rigorous and precise and able to find the center of a story and hold it steady. Not famous, not impressive on paper to someone like my father, but genuinely, verifiably good in ways that accumulated over time. I covered city council disputes that led to policy changes. I wrote a 3-part series on housing instability in the county that won a State Press Association award my 3rd year at the magazine, a physical award, a plaque with my name on it, presented at a ceremony I attended alone because I had not told my parents about it in advance, because I had stopped performing my accomplishments for that particular audience. My editor, a woman named Carla who had been in regional journalism for 25 years and had the measured enthusiasm of someone who did not give praise carelessly, told me after that series that I had a rare ability to make structural problems feel human without ever losing the precision of the underlying argument. That sentence from her meant more to me than my father's silence ever could have, and I filed it away somewhere permanent. The years went by. My father and I settled into a polite, functional distance. Holidays were navigated with the careful choreography of people who have agreed, without ever quite saying so, to stay in the shallow end. Phone calls were kept brief. I stopped trying to show him things I'd written. I stopped mentioning the award, or the readership numbers, or the letters from readers who said a piece had helped them understand something they'd been living inside without language for. I stopped expecting warmth from that direction, and redirected my energy toward people who gave it back. And then my parents decided to throw a party. 35th anniversary. My mother had wanted to celebrate properly for years, and my father, in a rare gesture of generosity, agreed. The Riverside Grill, 50 guests, sit-down dinner, the whole production. I was asked to attend, which I did. I was not asked to speak or help plan or contribute beyond showing up in the blue dress that would look nice in photos. I showed up. I wore the dress. I was pleasant to people I barely knew and warm to the ones I did. I was, by any reasonable measure, a perfectly appropriate guest at my parents' anniversary dinner. My father had been drinking. Not heavily, he is not a heavy drinker, but enough to sand down whatever internal editor usually exists between what he thinks and what he says. He was in the middle of a conversation with 2 colleagues from Hensley Manufacturing when I came over to say hello. I don't remember exactly what I said that triggered it. Something ordinary. Something about my work, probably, because someone had asked and I'd answered honestly. My father's face had done the thing it does when I say something he finds irritating. A small tightening around the jaw, a slight shift in posture, and then he turned to me, in front of those colleagues, in front of table 7, in front of 50 people and the floral centerpieces and the anniversary banner, and said what he said. A waste of a daughter. Too proud to do better. Years. I held my glass of water and I looked at him and I said, very quietly, "Okay, Dad." Then I excused myself and walked to the restroom, where I stood in front of the mirror for 4 minutes, breathing carefully, giving myself permission to fall apart later and not now. Not now. I went back to the table. I finished the dinner. I hugged my mother at the end of the night and told her it had been a beautiful event. I drove home. And then I fell apart, alone, in the way that is actually worse than falling apart in public, because there is no one to witness it, and so it just keeps going until it doesn't. I called my friend Simone at 11 o'clock that night. She answered on the second ring, the way she always does for late calls, and I told her what had happened. She listened completely. When I finished, she said, "What do you need right now?" I said I wasn't sure. She said, "Okay, I'll stay on the phone until you figure it out." We talked for 2 hours. At the end of it, something had settled in me. Not resolution, nothing that clean, but a kind of firm, quiet decision. I was done. Not the angry kind of done, not the kind that calls back and says the things you didn't say in the banquet hall. The quieter kind. The kind that simply stops turning to face a direction that has told you, clearly and repeatedly, how little it sees you. I went home, and I started writing. Now I should tell you something I haven't mentioned yet, because the banquet hall story makes more sense with this context. For 2 years before that night, I had been building something outside of my magazine job. A newsletter, long-form journalism, independent, subscriber-funded, the kind of writing I cared about most. I had started it with 112 subscribers, which is not a number that impresses anyone at a dinner party, but is a number that tells you something true. Those 112 people had found it on their own and were paying for it because they wanted to. Nobody had sent them. No algorithm had pushed it. They had simply found it and decided it was worth $12 a month. I wrote about regional policy, local business, the kind of stories that mattered to real people in ways that didn't always make it into publications chasing national clicks. I wrote carefully and often, and without compromise, and every month the number grew. By the night of my parents' anniversary dinner, I had 4,300 paid subscribers. I had not told my father this. I had not told him because he had made it clear over years that he would find a reason to minimize whatever number I offered. Too small, wrong format, not a real business. I had decided to simply build it until the number was large enough to speak without my help. After the anniversary dinner, I wrote the most precise and personal piece I had ever published. I did not name my father. I did not describe the evening. I wrote about what it means to build something in a field someone you love has told you is worthless, and the particular loneliness of succeeding quietly in a direction no one close to you is watching. It spread in a way I had not experienced before, shared thousands of times, picked up by 2 larger publications who asked permission to reprint. My subscriber count jumped from 4,300 to 9,600 in 3 weeks. And then Gerald Pruitt emailed me. I did not know Gerald Pruitt had known who I was before that dinner. I did not know, because my father had never mentioned it, because my father did not read my work, that Gerald Pruitt had been a subscriber to my newsletter for 7 months. He had found it through a colleague, read the back catalog, and admired it enough to keep paying for it without ever connecting me to the daughter of the man who worked in his division. He connected the dots at table 7. His email was measured and professional. He introduced himself formally, as though I might not remember him, and said he had been a reader of my work for some time and had not realized until the anniversary dinner that I was Richard Marsh's daughter. He said he found the newsletter's growth trajectory impressive and that he had shared it with several contacts in his professional network. He said he hoped I was well, and that he thought I should know my work was valued in places perhaps closer to home than I realized. He did not mention what my father had said at the dinner. He didn't have to. I sat with that email for a full day before I wrote back. I thanked him. I told him I hadn't known he was a reader. I asked because I am curious by nature, and because I've learned that being direct is better than being cautious, whether his sharing the newsletter had anything to do with the subscriber spike I'd seen. He wrote back, "Some of it, yes. I forwarded it to 14 people. Several of them subscribed to things with large distribution lists." 14 people. A casual forward from a man at table 7 who had watched my father say what he said and had made his own quiet, separate assessment of the situation. My father called me 3 weeks after the dinner. He'd heard, apparently, from several colleagues at Hensley that they'd subscribed to something I wrote. He did not know about Gerald Pruitt's email. He did not ask. He was stiff and formal on the phone, the way he gets when he is navigating something he doesn't have language for, and he said, "People at work are reading your newsletter." "I know," I said. A pause. "How many subscribers do you have?" I told him the current number, 9,800 at that point. Another pause, longer than the first. "Your mother told me what I said at the dinner was out of line," he said finally. I waited. "She was right," he said. "It was out of line. That is the closest my father has ever come to an apology. I am aware that for some people it would not be enough, and I understand why. For me, in that moment, with everything I knew about who he was and how far that sentence had traveled to reach me, it landed as something. Not enough, but something real. I said, "Thank you for saying that." He said, "Do you ever write about manufacturing?" and I almost laughed. I almost actually genuinely laughed. "Not yet," I said, "but send me something you think matters and I'll read it." He sent me an industry article 2 days later. It was not something I would publish, but it was something he'd read and thought of me, which was more than he had done in 28 years. I read every word of it. I sent him a response with 3 questions about the subject matter. He answered them the next day. Carefully, at length, in a register I recognized as the one he uses when he respects who he's talking to. We have exchanged 14 emails since then, all about manufacturing, supply chains, labor economics. He has not said he's proud of me. He has not called the newsletter impressive. But he engages with my questions seriously, and he reads what I send him. And last month he forwarded me a piece from an industry journal and said, "Thought this might be useful background for something you're working on." I have decided to let that be enough for now. Not because I have stopped wanting more. I don't think that want ever fully disappears, honestly. But because I found that the energy I used to spend turning toward him is more useful spent on the work. And the work has become something I could not have imagined the night I stood in the Riverside Grill holding a glass of water and breathing through 4 minutes alone in a restroom mirror. The newsletter crossed 15,000 paid subscribers last month. At $12 each, the math is not complicated. It is now my full-time income and then some. I left the magazine 8 months ago on good terms, with the genuine blessing of an editor who told me when I handed in my notice that she had been waiting 2 years for me to trust myself enough to go independent. I have a small office with a window that faces east. I write every morning when the light comes in. Simone and I have dinner every few weeks, and she asks about the newsletter with the kind of interest that is not polite but actual. She reads it, argues with my conclusions sometimes, sends me sources. That distinction, between polite interest and actual interest, still means a great deal to me. Gerald Pruitt and I have exchanged maybe a dozen professional emails since that first one. Warm, collegial, the way of 2 people who respect each other's work. He has never explicitly referenced the anniversary dinner. I have never asked him to. Some things are understood without being said, and the understanding is enough. My father reads the newsletter. I know because the subscriber analytics show a login from an IP address registered to Hensley Manufacturing every Tuesday when I publish. He has never mentioned a specific piece to me. He has never said he was proud. He reads it quietly on Tuesday mornings and says nothing. And I have made my peace with that being the form his attention currently takes. It is not everything. It is not the version of him I would have chosen. But it is more than I had before that night in the banquet hall, which tells me that sometimes the thing that breaks something open is not the intended cruelty of the words, but the unexpected witness who hears them and decides to respond differently. If you are someone who has had your work dismissed, your calling called a hobby, your field called decorative, your ambition called pride, I want you to hear this. The people who cannot see what you are building are not a reliable measure of its value. They are people with a limited view, standing too close to the wound between you to see clearly what's growing on the other side of it. You do not need to convince them. You do not need to wait for their verdict to change before you proceed. Build the thing anyway. Build it until the number speaks on its own. Build it until the colleagues quietly forward the link. Build it until the man at table 7 sends you an email 7 months after he started paying attention. The right people are already reading. You just don't know all their names yet. Thank you for staying here with me until the end. If this story found you somewhere real, please like and subscribe. It genuinely matters. Have you ever had someone dismiss what you were building, and then had to watch them reckon with what it became? Tell me in the comments below. I read every single one. Until next time, build the thing they told you wasn't worth building. Then build it bigger.